A lot of people talk about prenups, but did you know there's an alternative? A prenup is a plan for what's going to happen, not just if you get divorced. It's not always a plan for failure of the marriage. It's a plan for what's going to happen with your stuff over time. If you have done some estate planning and some business planning before you're married, sometimes that can have very similar effects as a prenup. For example, if you have created a trust, and a particular kind of trust, that owns your separate property assets before you get married, then there is a clear, bright line. These assets were pre-marriage assets, and they are not marital assets. They're your separate property, and they're going to be treated as such. Now, the trust has to have appropriate language that accommodates that, but often simply doing some estate planning before you get married and establishing, I owned this and I owned it separately, is a good idea. And then that might soften the need to go to that ultimate step of having a prenup. But when should you do a prenup? When is a prenup like a no-brainer? And I'm going to tell you a couple of big things. If it's not the first marriage, and if you have children by prior marriages, and if you have significant assets of your own before you get there, a prenup is not only advisable. If you don't do it, you're crazy. Here's a real life situation that happened to somebody that I know and that I worked with. A woman, her husband died. A clergy person in her church that she knew, his wife had died. And the two of them had separate assets, and they had separate children, and she had most of the assets. And they came together and they got married, and it was wonderful and beautiful, and everybody called them mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. And then she died first. And in her will, she didn't have a trust. She left everything to her husband. And I love you, everything goes to my husband. And he had one that said everything goes to my wife. It was a pretty significant estate, several $1 million, and all the money really came from her. Her children were not worried. They called this man dad and grandpa. They went to his house for Sunday dinners. They were very close. But then sometime later, he died. And all the property was his. And in his will, he gave it only to his children, not to hers. Now, that was not their intent. That's not what they wanted. But that was the consequence. That was the effect of what they did. And her children said to the people in the family that they had been calling brother and sister for more than a decade, hey, brother and sister, that money came from our mom. Don't you think it would be fair for you to at least share that with us? And the brothers and sisters that were his children said, look, if mom and dad had wanted you to get this, they would have named you. Obviously, they didn't name you, so it's ours, and we're not going to give you any. So what was a happy and loving family, a blended family that was wonderful and beautiful, became a battleground, and the family is now scarred, and it's bloody awful. People that used to love each other no longer talk to each other. So a prenup in a situation like that is a duh. You better do one, even if you completely trust the person you're getting married to. Typically, there's going to be 3 schedules: his property, her property, and our property. And you can determine what's going to happen to that over the course of your marriage. For example, on the our property schedule, you can say that so much is going to vest. I recently did a prenup with someone where the husband who had lots of money and the wife had no money, but every year of their marriage, he contributed more to the our pile so that she would be well taken care of. Another interesting thing that the prenup needs to do is address, what are we going to do with the family residence, especially if it's going to be a house that is already owned by one of the spouses that has a mortgage on it. So we will often say something like, this house is the separate property of whichever spouse owned it. And even though there's a mortgage on it, and even though they're going to pay the mortgage with earnings during the term of the marriage, which are marital property, we're going to treat that mortgage payment as if it was rent. So the equity in that house That was whichever spouse's house before the marriage remains that spouse's separate house and doesn't inadvertently become commingled because they're paying the rent on it. We can do things like build in life insurance. So if it's a second marriage and there's children from prior marriage, the one spouse might say, well, yeah, my property is going to go to my children, but I'm going to buy a life insurance policy to take care of my spouse, who I love. Another crucial thing a prenup can do is allocate debt. This is particularly significant when one spouse comes to the marriage with a lot of debt. Student loans, business loans, bad credit card debt, or whatever. They can agree among themselves, yeah, I'm not responsible for your credit cards. That's your problem. You're not going to bring that to me. Prenup can also define what kind of spousal support either party would get in the event of a divorce. And this is an interesting situation because based on the term of the marriage, how long it is, how dependent, whether one spouse is dependent or gives up a job, that can go into consideration when the courts divide this up without your agreement. So it's way better to have an agreement and a plan of this is what we're going to do in the event things don't work. And another powerful thing that we see a lot these days is the division of income. Now, the default is, in all 50 states, income received during the term of the marriage is a marital asset and subject to division by marriage. But especially when we have two high income earning professionals coming together, they can say, look, I got my profession, you got your profession, I have my retirement plans, you have your retirement plans. We're going to treat those as separate. And what each of us earns from our profession or our business is going to be separate, even though we're married. And in that kind of case, then they need to agree, and we're each going to contribute some number to a joint account that will be used to buy groceries and pay for common marital expenses. You also get to pick the venue. Where do you want the division of your marital assets determined in the event there is a divorce? And it can be the default, wherever you happen to be getting divorced. Or you can say, yeah, no matter where we live, no matter what we're doing, we're going to be governed under the laws of whatever state. And different states have different rules. Some states are community property states, they have rules. Some states are common law properties, and there's some hybrid states. Louisiana and some other states have some interesting quirky rules that you need to be aware of. Some interesting things that we also see a lot is in mixed religion, when there's two strongly held religious beliefs and one is not converting to the other. Well, how are the children going to be raised? In what religion? You've just got to be realistic and come to terms with that. That's going to be an issue. Age difference is another one to address. If there's a big gap, one is significantly older than the other. And by the way, it's not always the man that's older. If there's a big gap in age, you've got to address that. And then, of course, as we've touched on in the beginning here, what are the children in the next generation going to get or not get? So when a couple sit down and say, look, we're going to get married, you need to have some grown-up conversations. It's been my experience that when couples actually sit down and talk through the issues that come up in the prenup process, even if they then elect to opt out and say, yeah, I'm not going to do the prenup, just the fact that they went through all those issues and talked about them, they end up having a healthier and stronger relationship that is more likely to succeed. So now what about, oh wait, we're already married. What do we do? That's sometimes called a postnup. Nup, by the way, stands for nuptial, which is a funny word for marriage. So sometimes we just use the modern word called a marital agreement, whether it's before or after. So when would people want a post-marital agreement? Often we see situations where that's part of an asset protection plan. I'm going to give my assets to my spouse because I'm in a high-risk profession or business. I'm likely to get sued. And if they sue me, I don't want them to give my assets, so I'm going to give them to my spouse. Well, guess what? You need an agreement to document, yeah, I'm only giving this to you for certain reasons, and if we ever get divorced, I get it back. I had a case some time ago where a physician said, I'm so smart, I don't need to pay for your expensive asset protection plan. I'm just going to give all of my assets to my wife, which he did. And a short time later, she said, sweetheart, I've been unhappy in our marriage for a long time, and I've always wanted to divorce you, but it was never worth it until now. Now that I own everything, it's worth it. And so she divorced him. She got it all. He got nothing. So just giving stuff to your spouse without an agreement as to what happens if the marriage ends is a crazy, stupid way to do asset protection. Postnup agreements can also happen when you're moving to a community property state or out of a community property state to or from another one. If you have citizens of a foreign country, if one spouse is not a U.S. citizen, That can affect what goes into a postnup. Sometimes for estate planning, we might be doing special kind of a spousal lifetime access trust or other things like that. So there's a lot of reasons why a postnup is something you might consider. Now, in the event that divorce becomes inevitable, it's going to happen. There's some things that you got to be aware of. Many of the estate planning documents that you set up during your marriage suddenly become either void or voidable. When you have estate planning documents, you designate people who can make decisions for you. Legal decisions, financial decisions, medical decisions, and generally speaking, you do not want that person to be your ex-spouse. There's actually laws that govern this and say once you file the divorce, your ex-spouse is automatically kicked out of those documents. So it's crucial that when you get to that point, that you update those documents to reflect your wishes. And the bottom line is you need to talk to a lawyer who knows what they're doing. And there's two kind of niches here that relate to each other. There's the family law issues for which you need a family law attorney. That's a fancy way of saying a divorce attorney. And there's the estate planning issue, which is generally an estate planner. And often family law attorneys and estate planning lawyers don't do the same thing. I don't do divorces. I did one long ago. I'll never do another one. And likewise, people who focus their legal practice on divorces are generally not going to be geared up to give you good advice about estate planning. So I'm sorry to inform you that if divorce is inevitable, you probably need at least 2 lawyers. And you may need more than that if you have business interests in real estate and complicated things going on. So we've kind of talked about you're going to get married. What are some things you can do before you get married? There's actually some estate planning you can do before you get married that may make a prenup unnecessary, or at least less necessary, or even if you do a prenup, more effective. There are many instances where a prenup is just a no-brainer. You better do one, especially marriages late in life when one spouse has significant property, the other one doesn't, or when there's children from more than one marriage. Our firm is taking new clients. The best way to get in with us is to click on the link below and get on the wait list. We encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to create content that helps you understand how things work so that you can make good decisions. So if there's something you'd like to hear about or something you feel like we didn't address, we welcome your comments. We look forward to hearing from you and working with you.